good.
Hi, everybody. I want to say hi, and I want to welcome you all to Mindful Monday.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Very nice. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about anger. And anger is a big topic. There's a lot to be said about it. There's a lot to know about it. And we certainly don't profess to know all there is. And we're just going to be having a conversation about our ideas, our experiences, perhaps personally, but very much so professionally. And we really invite you to type into the chat box any questions that you have. And also, if you as an individual or a single would like to work with us individually, that means coming on and talking personally about an individual situation, we really would welcome that, because we believe that if one person has an issue, that a lot of people do. And although we have, maybe I don't know how many people we have on this call, a lot of people are watching the replays of it. And if you're comfortable being that person to share your story that will perhaps help and touch other people, we really invite you to do that. In fact, we'll send you a book if you do.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so tonight we're talking about anger. And anger, as I look at it, is a form of resisting what is. As we go through life, a lot of stuff happens outside of our control. There's me inside and what I experience and all my emotions, and then there's outside of me events that happen. It's traffic, it's affairs and relationships, it's people disappointing us, it's annoying habits. There's all these things that happen outside of us. And and that's what I refer to as what is. Those things are just happening. And our relationship to what is what I believe produces anger. And I look at anger as the muck, and we've talked about that before. The muck is that mucky place that we get into when we resist what is. When I look at you and I say, you know what, you really should have put a different top on.
Mm-hmm.
I told you should have put a different top on.
Mm-hmm.
Or you really should have, whatever it is. And embedded in the muck is one word that trips us all up, and that word is should. You should have told me you were going to be coming home late.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have spent so much time at the store. You should have not told so-and-so what I told you. So should is kind of the basic word. And whenever we're in should, we're in blame. And whenever we're there, we kind of slip further and further into the muck.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with annoyance, and then it goes to frustration, and then it goes into boom, anger.
Right.
So those are my opening remarks on anger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of personal, I would say, because I did have a really bad temper for many, many years. And I raised my two sons with a bad temper. And my father had a really bad temper. So for me, anger is personal. It's a personal journey. And I had to learn the hard way that anger, at least from my perspective, it has a purpose, but it's very toxic. And although it can be instructive, it can be very destructive. And it can tear away the fabric of everything that you've built up in your relationship. So I think we have to be very respectful of anger and really do our best to understand it, why it occurs, what it is. What is anger? Being curious about that.
Yeah, so I love that you bring up your own upbringing and how it translated into you being angry. You've talked a lot about your dad being angry, and as a result, you've been angry too. And we've experienced and talked about like how that manifests itself.
Right.
So what's your take on, given that you had an angry dad and then you end up angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not now, you've really worked through a lot of it. Why do you think it manifests that if I have an angry parent, I was raised with one, that I end up angry? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the main thing I think is my father modeled a certain behavior for me when I was growing up. So, it's what you see, it's what you think is normal. You're a child, you don't know. And so he was my teacher. So I respected that. And within the anger, I did my best to, as a child, to justify it, to make sense out of it. And so, of course, I learned that that's what you do. When things don't go your way, to get it to be your way, you get angry. And if I get angry enough, I'll get my way. Although I learned it doesn't work out that way very often.
So for you, it was modeled, so it was easy to imitate.
Yes,
right? It's
right.
what I saw.
That's
That's how you do stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to get stuff done, you get angry. And when I get angry, I get my way. That's
Right.
the story that you told yourself.
That is the story.
Right.
Yes.
And then you just practice it every year
Right.
of your life.
Right.
Now
Right.
you're, practicing for so many years.
I think that's the definition of anger in some ways. It's when you're not getting your way. When things aren't going your way, you begin to push back. And as Debbie said, I think your definition is brilliant. And I think it's very, very true that anger, the seed of anger, not the seed, but the manifestation of anger is when you're not accepting what is. I mean, that's very few words, not accepting what is, 4 words, but it's very powerful. It's anytime you're pushing against reality as it's presented to you. And you're saying, I don't accept it. I don't accept this. And that's where it all breaks down. One partner is behaving a certain way or saying something the other person doesn't like, and it's making me angry because I don't accept what you're saying.
And I think you should be saying something different.
Right, or agree with me.
Right.
Or see my way. So it's got that controlling element to it, which is very hard. The typical manifestations of anger are judgment. You feel you're judging the other person, forming strong opinions towards the other person. As Debbie said, a lot of shoulds, shoulda, coulda, woulda, blame, shame, criticism. Those are all, if you're doing any of those things, you're in anger. Blaming, stonewalling,
right.
Defensiveness. Anytime you feel yourself becoming defensive. So anger is manifestation as blame, shame, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and judging for sure. Judgment is and Sarah and I were reading a book recently about judgment. It's just a huge, a huge experience that you have when you're feeling angry. You're feeling judged usually.
Or you're certainly judging. I think, so like when you're in the muck, it's a very self-righteous.
Define the muck, because I don't know, although you've used the word.
Yeah, so the muck is basically that place we go when we're resisting what is. That's the definition of the muck. We could see what is, we could allow what is, we can embrace what is. Those are higher levels. But when we're in the muck, we're resisting. That means we're rallying against. And what happens in the muck is our ego gets activated. That's where the ego lives, is within the muck. And the ego really has 2 purposes. As far as I see it, there's many people that define it differently. But the way I see it is the ego wants us to be right, and it wants us to look good. And it wants to really serve in those 2 endeavors. And so any time that somebody comes to us and threatens us with being wrong or, looking incompetent or stupid or not good enough, threatens us in that way, the ego just goes to work. And we rally against that.
Right.
And that's what puts us in the muck. And we know we're in the muck when, we talked about our words, like you should be doing something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're rallying against something outside of us. Mm-hmm. We're not really taking responsibility, because we're really basically saying that something outside of me needs to change. It shouldn't be that way.
Right.
My mom shouldn't behave that way. My dad shouldn't behave that way. My kids, my spouse, whatever it is, shouldn't be happening. And because I think it shouldn't be happening, I'm getting upset about it. So it's very different if I say, my kids shouldn't be doing that, and that's the situation. We got to address it. It's raising concern, but it's not raising anger. Yeah. I'm not rallying against it. I'm just observing it. And I'm saying we've got a situation here that we got to change. That's very different. That doesn't put me in the muck. It's I get in the muck when I get upset about something. And so a lot of people will say, well, isn't it normal to go into the muck? Because, anger is kind of a natural emotion,
Hmm.
annoyance is. And the reality is we all go into the muck. I think we go into the muck like numerous times throughout the day. We'll order something from DoorDash and it's like, where is it? Should have been here. Geez. And I get annoyed. Well, annoyance is really the trailhead to anger, right? Starts there. The problem that I see is that every time we rally against what is, DoorDash isn't here, he didn't show up on time, and we get annoyed, we lower our vibration, just little bits at a time. And if you think about going through the day and you get annoyed, let's say 10 times, every time you do it, you're lowering your vibration. And so when our vibration is really low, we are going to be triggered to anger that much more easily, right?
Very true.
And I think a lot of us just have like muck set points.
Mm-hmm.
We have a certain amount of muck or resistance or anger that we're comfortable with. We grew up that way. We're comfortable with it. It's natural. And so we will attract people and situations that aggravate us because it feels okay.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if you
Talk about that, because I think that's really critical. You're talking about the law of attraction again, which we bring up a lot when we talk, because it's so relevant to and relevant to this topic.
Right.
So maybe you could say more about that.
Well, what happens, I think, with the muck set point for me is that, let's say I've got on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 is I am comfortable with and I live in the mood of anger. It's very different to feel angry, to experience the emotion of anger. It's different from living in the mood of anger, where anger is the predominant emotion that I live with, right? So if I live in the mood of anger, let's say that gives me a 10.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say I live in the mood of joy and happiness, that would give me a 1 on this anger scale, right? And I think that on that scale, we all have levels that we're comfortable with. So I would probably assess for myself, and this is so subjective, he would probably give me a different number, but I would give myself a number of maybe like 3 or 4. Like I'm much more toward joy and happiness than I am on anger, but I'm certainly capable of going up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's our set point. So what happens with this set point is, let's say I have a set point of like an 8 on the muck scale, how much resistance and anger I'm comfortable with. Then let's say situations change outside of me. Our relationship gets good, the kids are doing good. Like I'm going to start feeling uncomfortable because I don't have that much muck in my life. I don't have things to be resistant about. I don't have things to complain about. And so I will naturally gravitate toward bringing more of that in. If, for example, like I'm at an 8 and circumstances bring me up to a 9 or a 10, I'm going to start letting go of things. And so, sometimes you see it with friends where they're really upset with another friend, but then something happens and all of a sudden that complaint just goes away. So
interesting. So we attract it because we're comfortable. That's the level that we're at most of the time.
Right.
So like attracts like. The more angry I am, the more there's going to be anger in my life.
Exactly.
So we're just bringing it in. I wanted to also just address this issue of why anger exists. I think it's kind of important to break it down a little bit. It's a natural human emotion. We know that. And we also know it can be very useful, perhaps at times. And it was useful at times. And that's why we have anger, because as we evolved, you all know the story of why we have the fight or flight response, because anger can be defined in certain biological ways. And one is the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is very much a part of that fight or flight response. So we want to be able to understand the sympathetics. Thank you. We want to be able to understand that, there was a time when we needed to fight for our lives almost every day, right? We're fighting saber-toothed tigers who are chasing us, and we had to run. Or we had people who were attacking us, and we had to fight. So we're just going back and forth, living in this realm of fight or flight, right? Fast forward to the 20th century, right? And we no longer have a saber-toothed tiger fighting us, but we still have that biological instinct to fight or flight. So anytime somebody pushes against me in some way, or wrongs me, or does something that threatens me, and that threat could be, just like we would say, criticism, judge me harshly, do something that makes me feel like I'm wrong. Anytime we have those emotions, it triggers that very old fight or flight response that we've had. So in some ways, it's not as useful as it used to be, but we still have it on board, so it comes out a lot. Is that
Yeah, no, I
a
think
fair
that's a really
understanding?
good explanation of it. And because of that, we're highly sensitized to our environment.
Yeah,
We're on constant alert biologically to say threat,
right.
threat, threat.
It was a survival
It
mechanism.
is.
It is a
It is. And
survival
that's why
mechanism.
people say, I don't know what happens. I just like, it just comes over me and I don't like it, but that's just the way it is. It's just the way I am.
It's a biological, physiological response to any threat in the environment.
Right. And then you couple that with the beliefs that I downloaded from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And, the common belief that we've talked about before is I'm not good enough. And there's all variations of that. I'm not lovable enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not competent enough. I'm not desirable enough.
Right.
We all have some version of that. And then if somebody in the environment stokes that mistakenly, inadvertently, not on purpose, right? That biological instinct that you're talking about just fires up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little bit of a situation that's designed for us to stay in this constant challenge of staying out of anger.
Yeah.
And when it happens again, we just feel like, I don't know how to control this. I don't know where it comes from. I don't understand it, but I know it's not good for me. Some people say that. Some people say
Right.
just the way I am.
Right. It's harder for those folks who, we see it in our practice, who've had abuse as a child, where, like, I wouldn't say mine was extreme, but where you had a father who, or a mother who was very violent, who was verbally abusive. If you grow up in those kinds of environments, you might be more sort of sensitized to threats in the environment like that. We see it with PTSD for sure. Those who come home from war, who experience high alert all the time. And those are the kinds of responses that come from, just having this built-in anger and frustration that you don't know how to deal with. And it just sits in your body, and you're just waiting for the next encounter or threat in your environment. So, it can be very, very challenging and difficult for certain people. And we have seen, of course, the extreme of that, which is, becoming violent. Anger, Debbie said, annoyance is this, frustration is the seed of anger. Annoyance is the seed of frustration. So we kind of see these levels, right? But when you get to a certain level, it can be very scary and very destructive. Yelling is a form of anger, right? And yelling can be very toxic. And we don't want to yell in our relationships with our partner. Yelling is going to deteriorate your relationship.
Well, yeah, in some relationships, some relationships that we've seen that they just yell at each other. It's the way they communicate.
Yeah.
So it's like just kind of the way we do business.
The way we do
and
it.
it really is just the fabric of our relationship, and it's not as problematic as others where it's not, and it just kind of comes.
Right. That's true.
I know my dad was.
I'll
talk about him in a second. Let's go to the question.
Yeah, so we've got two questions actually. The first one is, can you guys speak to how you approach the vitriolic political climate in our country and protecting your energy and relationship in the wake of all that is going on right now? How should couples draw boundaries with the chaos of the outside world?
Oh, that's such a good question. Like, raise your hand if everybody has that question. It is a really tense environment, and we are politically different. And so we can speak directly to that question. And it's been a really good learning experience for us. And almost every day, we're kind of dealing with it. And I think personally, and I think for you as well, it's a great opportunity to use the skills that we have and approach it in a very different way. And it usually goes like this. We approach it terribly. We go right into the muck. We start I don't know if we say yelling and screaming, but talking loud, right?
Mhm.
And getting mad at each other and making these accusations. And then it's like, whoa, wait a second. We just went there. And
Mhm.
then we kind of climb out. So the question is, how do you maintain a sense of centeredness and calmness when we've got all this chaos going on? Is that the question, Sarah? In the midst of the political environment. Do you want to tackle that one first?
Well, for me personally, I think that, I think that mindfulness is a really important subject to talk about when you're talking about anger, because, the idea of being able to self-soothe and being able to calm yourself down is really, really a skill. It's an important skill. So, in the face of somebody who's got a completely different perspective from you, and it's very, for you, triggering because you can't understand it, you can't come to terms with it. Um, you can attack or fight back or try to convince or persuade or push your opinion, or you can take a deep breath and you can kind of sit with the energy that's coming up inside of you, which is a technique anyway for dealing with your own anger. It's learning how to breathe. It's learning how to calm yourself down so that you can be present, mindful for the other person to share their perspective and their opinions. There's nothing wrong with another person's opinions and judgment being different than yours. What's bad is pushing back at that person and telling them they're wrong and telling them to, be quiet.
Because that just activates my ego,
It
right?
It
You're telling me I'm
activates.
wrong, I'm going to tell you you're wrong. You just
So,
threatened me.
so you can't get anywhere that way. So I have learned how to relax and listen and be present and calm myself down with breathing techniques so that I can be available to not push myself.
It sounds like hyperventilation sometimes.
Sometimes it gets to that point, but
or it looks like hyperventilation. I agree with you. I agree with you. And certainly when we're in those conversations, I have to find my breath.
mhm,
But I think you almost have to go back before that. We're talking about vibration, right? So
vibration.
if I get annoyed 10 times throughout the day on this particular topic, right? And it may be, listen, the news is a great way to
Right.
get annoyed
Mhm.
because, let's face it, the news is very polarizing. No matter which side you're on and which news you're listening to, it's polarizing. And I can say, and many people do this, this is the one I love, and I do it myself. Listen, I've listened to the other side. So I've listened to all the sides. Well, what we're really doing when we hold an opinion is we're listening to that side to justify our side.
Mhm.
Let's be real, right?
Right.
So we get annoyed at the other side for having the opinion they have. And if I do that throughout the day, I'm seeding the anger. I'm seeding the polarization. I'm sealing the resistance. I'm seeding the resistance. And so, when we get into a conversation, that's just going to be amplified. So I think with Craig and I, what we've decided to do, and I think is pertinent to a more global conversation, is I say, you know what, we're in a relationship. I respect the fact that he holds an opinion. And embedded in that opinion is a lot of care and compassion. And just like embedded in my position is a lot of care and compassion. And so we both care a lot about things. We just look at it differently. And if you chunk up, we both have in common care.
Can you talk about the seed of anger from that perspective? Because I think what you're saying is also that if you were to break down your anger, you would see that it does have a message. Anger actually has a message. And if we quiet down and listen to what that message, what will it tell you?
Well, I think that what I say is embedded in the muck is the seed of your desire, right? Think about that. Embedded in the muck is a seed of your desire. So when I'm angry, it's informing me a little bit about what I care about.
Mm.
So if I'm angry at you for holding the position that you hold, because I think you should hold something different, who am I to tell you what you should believe?
Mhm.
But if I go down in there in the muck and then I say, wait a second, let me step away from that. Embedded in the muck is a seed of my desire. What is it that I desire? I desire to respect us. The two of us have a very respectful conversation and feeling about each other's positions,
Mhm.
that I want to look at your position and say, you know what, I respect that. It's different from mine, but it actually informs me a little bit.
All right, but from
So wait, let me finish.
okay.
I want to say one more thing. So what's really important to answer this person's question is you have to set an intention. You have to say that I want to rise above it. My intention is not to get embroiled in it, not to listen to all these different perspectives and land on one side and rally against the other side and just get myself upset, but to chunk up and just remove yourself from the blaming that goes on each side.
There's just something to be understood about anger that relates to this as well, and that is that anger is what we refer to as a secondary emotion. I don't want to get too into the jargon, but
because we have a question.
Basically what that means is anger, if you dig a little deeper and you just go underneath the surface, you all know what's underneath anger: hurt and fear. So anger shows up, but if you get to the seed of your desire and you're able to get to the emotion of hurt or fear or sadness, and you're able to express that to your partner and be a little vulnerable, because it's just under the surface of the anger. Keep that in mind. And if you do that, now you're getting at what your needs are. Now you're getting at what needs are not being met that you really need to be met. And you're able to have a conversation about that. If you lead with anger, you're not going to ever get there.
So bring it back to the political conversation. Can you speak to what's below it for you when you get angry?
Well, fear would be, I'm fearful for my country. I'm fearful for what could happen to our country and what it might look like. My hurt is that I feel a lot of suffering and pain for myself and for others who are experiencing what's going on right now. You know, racism and the experience of racism and the planet, destruction of the planet, and those types of things. So, you know, that's the hurt deep down. And I can share that. And we don't have to get into a political discussion about that.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of our relationship.
What do you mean?
So when you get angry, when we have a conversation,
Yeah.
I think you get angry with me.
Right.
What is the sadness?
Oh,
or
the
the
sadness,
for us?
it depends on the issue.
Right.
It really
Okay.
depends on the
Okay,
issue.
we won't go there.
Yeah, yeah. We have another
But-
question.
yes.
We've got questions coming in like crazy. Okay, so the first one, thank you, Emma. Is it a good idea to put a moratorium or a ceasefire on the conversation if we feel triggered and are getting angry?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Unequivocally, yes. And really, I think Debbie spoke to that beautifully the other day. She was telling me the exact words to say, and I wrote them down. When you need to take, we can call it what it is. You can have different names for it. I call it a timeout. You know, that's what we like to refer to. I need a timeout. And you had a very nice way of saying that. I'm being triggered. I'm just, how would you articulate
I think
that?
I would own the emotion that you're feeling, whether it's, you know, whatever it is. And I love you so much. And I don't want to bring this into a relationship right now. I want to have a conversation, if we even have one, when I'm in a more resourceful state. And anger is not a resourceful state. So that's, you know, reaffirm the relationship and why it's important. And out of respect for that relationship, I'm going to take a break.
I think it's important to set the ground rules in any relationship ahead of time. And talking about being able to take a time out is really important, because a lot of times when you take a time out, if a person is feeling any kind of abandonment issues or rejection, which is very common with anger, it might be one of the seeds of anger is feeling abandoned or rejected. And if you say, I want to take a time out, I need space, I can't talk about this anymore, and that triggers abandonment and rejection, that person's going to be having a really tough time giving you that space. So I think it's important to set the ground rules ahead of time and let both of you agree that this is going to be one of our tools. This is one of our strategies. If I ask for a timeout, I need you to be able to give that to me. And so you're all both on board with it.
It's a loving boundary, right?
Yeah.
I love you and I don't want to do damage right now. I think I might. If I continue.
Absolutely.
Okay, another question.
How do you go about it if the only emotion your partner knows is anger, defensiveness, and puts a wall up and doesn't allow you in?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I would say that that's a story, right? And well, it's probably what we call a grounded assessment. An assessment is my belief. And when it's grounded, it's because it's grounded in a lot of my experience. And so, if I'm in a relationship with somebody who keeps putting up a wall and doesn't let me in and lives in the mood of anger, I can point to a lot of experiences, right? So the question is, how do I deal with that, right? It's really tough. You need couples therapy. I would when we're dealing with our own or others' anger, we really have to lift up to a different type of energy to deal with it.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the adult child and the child and the adult
Right.
from Terry Real's perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
So what Craig is referring to is that when I'm in anger and when I'm putting up walls, I'm in what Terry Real refers to as my adaptive child. I'm not really in my adult space. And the child is protecting himself. And anger is a protective emotion. The purpose of anger, a lot of times, is to make my point. We hear a lot like, I'm not heard unless I start yelling. And so there's a fundamental belief that I have to get angry to be heard. And I think you kind of referred to that. And the other reason of anger, and this is kind of speaks to this person's experience, is anger keeps people away from me. And I feel safe when people go away, go further back. And that's how I protect myself. And so whenever there's anger like that that's going on, it's a protective response. It's an adaptive child, creating what was early on a logical response for that child. I mean, maybe that child lived in an abusive home. It made real sense to build a wall and maybe get angry if somebody came too close. The problem is that we develop these beautiful self-protective responses to situations when we're young, and then we just carry them along through life because they habituate themselves, they patternize themselves within our psyches. And so now we're using them when it's not even necessary. So if you're the spouse of a person who's doing that, I would say draw from the top of the ladder, which is all the energies of love. And I would start with compassion. Because when somebody's walling themselves off for you or getting angry, the common and most common sense response is to be defensive, get angry back. And that's only going to make them go into hiding more and attack you more with anger, because that's their strategy. I'm hiding behind this wall and I'm throwing things at you. So having compassion will kind of settle it down. And when it's settled down enough, you may be able to have a conversation. But it also is probably best to get a little bit of help too.
Yeah, I just want to add that, for many, many years, I said I had a problem with anger. And I believed, I had actually a belief system that it was appropriate and acceptable to vent my anger. I used to think of venting as getting it out,
Right.
and that made sense, well, we all need to get our anger out. I sort of told myself that story, right?
Sometimes you still do.
And sometimes I
Not
still
very
do.
often, but sometimes.
But what I learned was that it was making it really toxic for those around me, okay? I started to see that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the person who was the best person who showed me the antidote to anger was the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama, in his book on happiness, pointed out to me that it's not good to vent your anger. It's a terrible thing to vent your anger. It's toxic. It's toxic for me. It's toxic for the people in my environment. And what he taught me was the antidote was compassion. Mm-hmm. Compassion is one of the most underrated feelings or emotions that I know of in our society. We don't cultivate compassion in our society. So we need to cultivate more of that in our relationships. And if our partner is upset and angry and being mean and yelling, somehow being able to rise that ladder and find some compassion. This poor schmuck, look at him. Look at what's happening to him. He's
doing the best he can. He's been practicing this for years, and it was really wonderful for him when he was younger, but now it's not working, and he can't do anything else because he's been doing this for so long.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes you need to just walk away. I'm not suggesting anybody be a, what do you call it? Like a punching bag
Yeah.
for another person. You know, you need to set your limits and your boundaries, and that's really important. That's actually our conversation next week. We're going to be talking about loving boundaries and how to set boundaries.
We have another question and we're
Yeah.
running out of time. So
No, we're getting a lot of questions in tonight, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. This one is anonymous. So how is it best to deal with a partner who is quick to anger? At the time it's happening, naming it seems to only fuel the anger.
Right. Yeah. So I remember my dad had a temper, and he would come home if he was drinking, right? It was activated when he was drinking, and he would start yelling, and my mom would, like, you know, try and calm him down and try all these things. And then she said to her dad, she said, "Dad, I don't know what to do. He comes home after drinking. He's really upset. And I'm trying to say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And he just gets more and more angry with me." And so as my grandfather said, "Don't do anything. Just let him be." So she says, "Okay, I'll try it." So he comes home, he's angry, and she doesn't say a word. And he got angrier. So
we could talk about loving boundaries. I think that would make sense in the context of the question.
right.
Don't you?
I think that when somebody's angry in the moment, there's not much you can do. But knowing that it's a pattern, I would sit down when the person's not angry, because anger is like a runaway train. And if you're not angry and they're angry and you've tried things and they haven't worked, it's time to sit down and have a conversation and to say, you know, sometimes you get angry. And when you get angry, I get scared and I do all these things, but it only makes you more angry. And so can we talk about what we can do? Because I'm thinking that when you're angry, maybe I should just leave you alone, but I'm not sure. And I mean,
that's one way. Obviously, there's many ways.
Right.
I had an experience recently with my father. My father's been, you know, very abusive over the years, verbally. And, you know, this past week, he became verbally abusive towards me. And it was amazing. We were on the phone and he started laying into me. I don't know what happened, but at some point I cut him off and I said to him, "This is unacceptable. This is not happening anymore if you want to have a relationship with me. You've been doing this to me. You've been doing this to my brother. You've been doing it to my sister our whole lives. And it's going to come to an end right now." But I was very firm, but not mean, but firm. I don't know what happened, but something shifted.
Yeah.
Very powerfully. So, you know, sometimes you got to be really firm
They need a wake-up call
and say, this is not acceptable.
Yeah, right. I remember my dad one time, I think I was 10. We were at a restaurant and my dad was in his typical drinking, belligerent kind of mode. It was my birthday. And I'll never forget this. And I just said to my dad, I said, "If you keep doing this, I'm leaving when I'm 10. And there wasn't Uber. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I looked around, I saw maitre d', and I thought, okay, I'll just do that. So he continued on. And I went to the maitre d' and I said, "I'd like to call a taxi to go home." And the maitre d's looking around. He's like, he knew exactly where I came from. I was right there at the booth. And he came over to my dad and my parents, and he said, "Listen, she wants to go home, but I mean, she's young." And my dad said, "It's okay. It's fine. Debbie, sit down. It's fine." And he apologized. And from that point, he quit drinking.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was, sometimes you need that little push.
Yeah.
It's like reality sets in.
You know, this idea of boundaries is so powerful for me lately, especially. So I think next week we're going to really focus on that.
All right, 2 more questions here. What if I am the person feeling hurt and having fear, but it's the other person who is getting angry?
Yeah, it's kind of the same question, right?
Yeah.
What do I do with an angry person? And it's like, whatever you've done that hasn't worked, don't do that again.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that, you know, if you're living with an angry person, I think you have to really check in with yourself and see what kind of responses you're having. Because a lot of times when you're with an angry person and it continues, you find yourself in victim mode, you know, and so all the energy is in grievance. he does this, he does that, he does that. And when I live in a grievance with anything, and in this case, an angry spouse, that energetically, I'm not equipped to change the energy of my spouse because it's still resistance. He's having one form of resistance and I'm having another. And so you have to really be honest, like what's going on with you? What stories are you telling yourself? What complaints are you making to other people? And if that's going on and at play at all, and normally it is because it's like human nature, then that energy is not helping.
And that sort of ties into different styles we have of dealing with anger, because, you know, in relationship therapy, we talk a lot about the pursuer and the withdrawer, or another way to think about it is the turtle and the hailstorm. So different styles of dealing with anger. Turtle. When the hailstorm comes, they go into their shell and the hailstorm hails when they're angry. So identifying your style, you want to make sure, because if you're withdrawing when your partner's angry and you're pulling away and shutting down, that's just going to make things a lot worse, right? But we don't know what else to do in those situations. So I just want to say one last thing about that is in dealing with anger management, we do have to look at ourselves, because oftentimes we're stoking it and we don't even know it.
Right.
We're stoking it with a defensive comment, a defensive question, a criticism about what they're doing, their behavior. And really, one of the things that you can do is quiet down, quiet down again, quiet down some more, do some self-soothing, notice your pulse, notice your rate, relax, and then just listen.
Set a loving boundary too. And we'll talk about that next week.
But you can listen too.
You can listen.
You can just listen. You can go into listening mode.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is an interesting question that I think pertains specifically to yelling. You know, between a couple, he escalates the conversation as he says, "I'm yelling. I don't think my voice is raising. I don't swear. I think I'm observing and saying what needs to be done, etc." But does he say I'm yelling as in being loud, or is it his feeling of being told stuff that he doesn't want to hear?
Okay.
Where does the yelling come in?
I've seen it. I've seen, like in the office, somebody will say something in a very calm voice, but it's not a message that that person wants to receive. And it's like, why are you yelling? This is what you do. You yell. I didn't hear yelling. So a lot of times when we're receiving messages that we don't want, it can land as yelling.
That's part of it. The other thing is, you know, everybody has a different actual physiological perception of what volume is a yell, right? So it's really tricky, because me raising my voice slightly could be yelling for one person, whereas, you know, for another person, it could be just really loud that's yelling. So we have to analyze it. If your voice is assertive and forceful in any way, that could be perceived that way.
And when you're passionate about something,
even being emotional and passionate could be perceived as yelling. So it's really the person's perception. And I always go by that. I don't go by, you're wrong, I'm not yelling, you're misperceiving. If the person thinks I'm yelling, I want to understand why they think that way.
Right.
I'd be curious.
Right. And it's a lot of it, it's how you were raised, right?
It's how you were raised. If you were raised in a home where nobody raised their voice above a whisper, then anything above a whisper is going to sound like yelling.
I think I've told this story. My dad would say, my mom would say, "Abe, you're yelling." I'm not yelling, I'm talking loud.
Right. It's a good example.
You know, so it's all self-perception. Do we have any other questions?
That was it.
That was it.
Yeah. That's
okay.
It for tonight, and it's 7:45.
It's 7:45. So we did a good job. So this is, I mean, I feel like we've scratched the surface, but hopefully you walked away with some ideas and some insights into the nature of anger, and perhaps, and most importantly, how you respond to anger, how you respond to your own anger, how you respond to your spouse's anger or the anger of your parents, your kids, friends. And it's just really an important question to live with for a while, and to observe and not judge yourself and not judge others, but just become curious. What is my relationship with anger? And is it the relationship that I want, or do I want to tweak it? And if I want to tweak it, maybe set an intention that this is what I want to do. I want a new relationship with anger.
Yeah. So we look forward to seeing you next week. We're really excited about this topic on setting boundaries.
Loving boundaries.
Loving boundaries.
That's key.
And I think that's very connected to anger as well. So look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate you being there, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Craig and Debbie.
Thanks.
Greg and Debbie.